The water cycle. On Earth, water is constantly cycled through evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and runoff. In many instances, water can get trapped for long periods of time, especially in groundwater. Sometimes, water leaves the Earth, but not through the water cycle. The only way water can leave the Earth is usually if there's a large asteroid impact, volcano eruption, or if humans take water off of the Earth. For the water cycle, it is mostly driven by energy from the sun. There are some instances where water is evaporated from geothermal hot springs, but for the most part, energy from the sun drives the water cycle and weather. In fact, the higher the temperature, the faster water will evaporate and the faster the water cycle will commence. The first stage in the water cycle that we're going to talk about is evaporation. Evaporation occurs not only on land, but also on water. During the water cycle, when liquid water changes into a gas, we call that evaporation. Water can evaporate on any surface body of water, including oceans, lakes, rivers. It can also evaporate from moist soil. It does, however, take energy to evaporate. So water will evaporate faster in warm climates and faster where the sun is striking it directly. Evaporation will happen slower in cold climates, but wherever there is liquid water, it will evaporate eventually. Most evaporation happens in the ocean because that's where most water is on Earth. The next step we will be talking about is transpiration. Transpiration is when plants evaporate from themselves. When plants breathe in carbon dioxide, some water evaporates. That lost water is called transpiration. Fun fact, many cacti only breathe at night to reduce water loss. Due to the lower temperatures at night in the desert, the plants will lose less water to evaporation while still retaining their carbon dioxide intake. The next step we will be talking about is condensation. Condensation is when gaseous water turns into liquid water. This can occur most naturally in clouds. When gaseous humidity water rises up from the grounds and cools down as it rises, when it cools down enough and it reaches the dew point, it will become clouds and condensate out into a liquid. You can see this at home on a can or a cold drink. The cold drink will cause the air around it to reach the dew point, allowing water to condensate outwards. Precipitation. Precipitation occurs when water falls back down to the ground after condensation. This can occur as rain, snow, hail, sleet, or anything else that causes water to fall downwards. Once that precipitation hits the ground, a few different things can happen. In steep slopes, when rain hits the ground, it can become runoff very quickly because the steep slopes will prevent the water from going into the ground. If water does make it into the ground, we call that infiltration. Very little water actually makes it into ground. 80% of the water that gets precipitated will eventually evaporate within a few days. Most of that happens pretty quickly. The rest will happen when plants soak up the surface water and transpire it back out. But for the water that does make it into the ground and does infiltrate, we then call it something else. It's called groundwater. Next, we will look at runoff. Runoff is when water does not soak into the ground after precipitation. So runoff will occur in two different scenarios. One, if the ground is impermeable, which means it does not let water soak through it. Or two, if the ground has received so much water already that it is full of water, or known as saturated. In that instance, no more water can seep into the ground, so it runs off the surface. The most common source of runoff is rivers. Streams also included in there as well. When rain does fall into the ground and does soak into the ground, we call that groundwater. Groundwater also flows downhill, just like runoff does. However, groundwater can be stopped by impermeable rock underneath. If so, it can become an aquifer. Now, groundwater does make its way downhill, and some of that will make its way to the ocean. Runoff, as in this picture right here, can also make its way downhill into the ocean as well. It can also evaporate for runoff, and the ocean can also evaporate as well. So the end goal of most runoff, or groundwater, is to evaporate eventually.